The crisp mountain air, initially a welcome contrast to the humid lowlands they'd left behind, began to feel less invigorating and more oppressive. Sunlight, fractured by the dense canopy overhead, cast the trail in shifting patterns of light and shadow, lending an almost sinister quality to the overgrown path. Laughter, once a constant companion, dwindled to occasional bursts, replaced by a more cautious silence. Liam, the self-proclaimed leader of the group, usually brimming with boisterous energy, trailed behind, his usual confident stride replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He kept glancing over his shoulder, a nervous tic that hadn't gone unnoticed by the others. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, noticed the change first. "Guys," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the rustling leaves, "I'm getting a weird vibe here." She tugged at the strap of her backpack, her fingers tightening around the worn fabric. Beside her, Mark, usually the jokester, chewed on his thumbnail, his eyes fixed on the dense undergrowth that bordered the trail. His usual easy smile was gone, replaced by a strained grimace. Even Emily and Chloe, the inseparable twins, whose constant chatter had been the soundtrack of their journey so far, were unusually quiet. Their playful banter had ceased, replaced by an uneasy silence that hung heavier than the humid air. The vibrant hues of their summer attire seemed to dull against the backdrop of the darkening woods. The path, once clearly defined, had become barely discernible, swallowed by the encroaching vegetation. Twisted roots snaked across their path like skeletal fingers, reaching out from the damp earth. The air grew heavy with the smell of decaying leaves and damp earth, a cloying scent that clung to the back of their throats, thick and suffocating. The usual sounds of the forest, birdsong, rustling leaves, were muted, replaced by an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. A creeping dread began to take hold, an insidious feeling that coiled in their stomachs and tightened its grip with every step. It wasn't just the oppressive atmosphere, it was something deeper, a primal sense of unease that transcended the simple discomfort of a challenging hike. It was the feeling of being watched, of being followed by unseen eyes in the shadows of the dense forest. Liam, finally breaking his silence, muttered, "This isn't right." His voice was low, barely audible, a stark contrast to his usual booming pronouncements. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, though the air was far from hot. The sweat seemed to speak of a deeper unease, a fear that seeped from his pores. Mark, jolted from his silent contemplation, nodded slowly. "Yeah," he agreed, his voice hoarse. "It's like something's wrong. Really wrong." His gaze darted nervously from side to side, his hand instinctively moving towards the small, useless pocket knife he carried. Emily and Chloe exchanged a worried look. The twins, usually so inseparable, now seemed to have retreated into their own individual pockets of fear. Their usually bright eyes were wide with apprehension. The forest pressed in on them, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches intertwined like skeletal arms reaching for them. The sun, once a source of warmth and energy, now seemed to be a mocking observer, its rays barely penetrating the thick canopy, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around them like grotesque figures. As they pressed onward, the terrain became even more treacherous. The path, barely a trail at this point, disappeared completely, forcing them to navigate through a tangle of undergrowth and fallen branches. The air grew colder despite the sun still shining weakly through the trees. A chilling wind rustled through the leaves, creating a symphony of whispers that seemed to taunt them. The silence was punctuated by the occasional unsettling sound, the screech of an unseen bird, the snap of a twig that sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. These noises, while seemingly insignificant, fueled their growing sense of anxiety, transforming ordinary forest sounds into harbingers of unknown terror. The initial jovial atmosphere of their hike was a distant memory, replaced by a chilling silence punctuated by strained breaths and nervous glances. The friends, once so close, now seemed separated by a gulf of unspoken fear, each grappling with the creeping sense of dread that was taking root in their hearts. Their laughter was gone, replaced by a fearful silence. The journey, once a carefree adventure, had transformed into a desperate struggle against the encroaching darkness, both of the forest and of their own fears. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay, and the shadows seemed to deepen, growing longer and more menacing as the sun began its descent. The increasing darkness amplified their unease. The playful banter was replaced by hushed whispers. their usual confident strides now hesitant and slow. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, sent jolts of adrenaline through their veins. The forest, once a familiar landscape, had become a hostile and terrifying environment, its beauty cloaked in a suffocating blanket of dread. Liam stumbled, his foot catching on a hidden root. He swore under his breath, the sound oddly muffled by the thickness of the air. As he struggled to regain his balance, he saw it, a glint of metal far ahead, partially obscured by the dense undergrowth. "What's that?" he whispered, pointing towards the glint. His voice shook slightly. As they approached, the source of the glint became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the wreckage of a plane, half buried in the undergrowth. Its twisted metal a grotesque parody of its former glory. The sight was so utterly unexpected, so violently out of place in the quiet solitude of the forest, that it stole the breath from their lungs. The sense of dread that had been creeping over them now solidified into a paralyzing terror. This was no ordinary accident. This was something far more sinister. The plane, half consumed by the forest, was a monument to a silent tragedy, a stark reminder of their own vulnerability in the face of the unknown. The rusted metal groaned a mournful sigh under the weight of encroaching vines, a sound that resonated with a chilling finality in the oppressive silence of the forest. The plane, or what remained of it, lay half buried in the undergrowth, its fuselage twisted into a parody of its former aerodynamic grace. It wasn't a gentle crash. This was a violent, destructive impact, the force of which was evident in the mangled metal and shattered remains of its cargo. The initial shock gave way to a nauseating horror as they edged closer. Skeletal remains, bleached white by sun and rain, were scattered amongst the debris, the silent witnesses to a terrible tragedy. Some bones lay exposed, picked clean by the relentless passage of time and the scavenging creatures of the forest. Others were still partially clothed in tattered remnants of uniforms, hinting at a cargo crew. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood long dried, mixed with the earthy scent of decay. The closer they got, the more details became apparent, each one adding another layer to the growing horror. A section of the fuselage had been ripped open, revealing the interior, a chaotic jumble of twisted metal and scattered human remains. A crushed skull, nestled amongst many human remains, evoked a particularly visceral wave of revulsion. The realization that these were not just bones, but the remnants of lives brutally cut short, struck them with the full force of its grim reality. Their earlier fears, born of the oppressive atmosphere, now had a tangible and horrifying source. Then they saw the marks. Deep, gouging scratches, clearly not caused by the impact, marred the surface of the fuselage. These were not mere scratches. They were claw marks, long, vicious furrows that spoke of unimaginable strength and ferocity. Their size suggested a creature far larger than any known animal in this part of the world, a creature with claws like curved blades. These marks weren't just evidence of a crash. They were the signature of something far more sinister, something that had hunted and killed aboard this doomed aircraft. The discovery shattered the fragile equilibrium of their fear. The earlier unease, the feeling of being watched, was now a terrifying certainty. They weren't alone in this secluded corner of the woods. Something else was here, its presence marked by these chilling claw marks. Silence descended, heavier and more suffocating than before. The playful banter that had once characterized their hike was gone, replaced by a deathly stillness broken only by the ragged breaths of the five friends. Their eyes darted nervously from the wreckage to the surrounding forest, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the creature that had left its chilling mark on the plain. Sarah was speechless, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond simple fear. Her hands shook as she clutched her backpack, the mundane object suddenly feeling inadequate, useless against whatever lurked in this dark, secluded place. Mark, whose easy humor had been their constant companion, was reduced to a shell of his former self. His gaze fixed on the horrible scene before him, his usual jovial expression replaced by a rigid mask of terror. He swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it difficult to speak. Even the twins, Emily and Chloe, usually so inseparable, were visibly shaken. Their faces, usually alight with mischief, were now pale and drawn, their eyes reflecting the horror of the scene. The terror was universal, a cold hand gripping the hearts of all five of them. The sun, now sinking lower in the sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the wreckage. transforming the twisted metal and scattered bones into hideous parodies of human form. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of metal and the rustling of leaves disturbed by a stray breeze, each sound amplifying their fear, transforming the sounds of the natural world into ominous portents of danger. They were trapped, surrounded by the silent witnesses to a horrifying event. The plane, half buried in the earth, wasn't just a wreck. It was a tomb, a gruesome monument to a forgotten tragedy, a chilling testament to the power of something unknown and monstrous. The claw marks served as a terrifying reminder. They were not just observers, they were potential victims. The sense of dread deepened as they continued to examine the wreckage. The cargo hold, partially exposed, revealed a chaotic jumble of broken crates and scattered goods. Among the debris they saw it, a large, sturdy metal crate, ripped open on one side, but other than that, remarkably intact. It was marked with a faded yet still visible hazardous material sticker, its contents unknown, its very presence adding another layer of mystery and terror to the already gruesome scene. The sticker depicted a skull and crossbones, its stark imagery a grim warning of danger unseen. What horrors had this crate contained? Why did it look as if it was torn open from the inside out? The questions hung in the air, unanswered and unsettling, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The forest, once a beautiful place of adventure, was now a hostile entity, its beauty cloaked in the ominous presence of death. They stood there, 5 souls suspended between the horrific reality of the plane wreck and the terrifying unknown of what it represented. The forest held its breath, a silent, brooding witness to their fear, to the horrifying truth they had stumbled upon. Their carefree hike was now a looming nightmare, and the night was fast approaching. The last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the towering trees, plunging them into a deepening twilight. The shadows lengthened, growing sharper and more menacing, until the forest seemed to writhe with unseen movement. The chilling air grew colder, biting through their clothes, seeping into their bones. Their earlier apprehension solidified into a paralyzing fear. They knew with a chilling certainty that they were not alone. Something had left its bloody calling card on the wreckage of that plane, and the night was only just beginning. The crate. It was the only thing amongst the carnage that seemed intact, or at least relatively so. A hulking, rectangular behemoth of rusted metal, it sat amidst the scattered remains of the plane's cargo, a stark contrast to the surrounding chaos. Thick, rusted chains, almost as thick as a man's arm, bound it to a broken section of the plane's frame, their links corroded and weak yet still stubbornly holding. The weight of the crate was evident in the way the chains sagged under the burden, each link groaning a low, mournful sound under the pressure. This wasn't just some random piece of luggage. This was something significant, something deliberately secured, and the sheer effort required to chain it down spoke volumes. The most striking feature, however, was the sticker. A stark black and white symbol emblazoned across its weathered surface. A skull and crossbones. The universally recognized warning of imminent danger, of something lethal and unforgiving. Beneath the grim imagery, faded but still legible, were the words, "Hazardous materials. Handle with extreme caution." The paint was peeling, the warning dulled by years of exposure to the elements, but the message remained chillingly clear. What unspeakable horrors did this crate contain? What kind of cargo could elicit such a stark and desperate warning? A wave of apprehension washed over them, even stronger than the initial shock of the gruesome discovery. The skeletal remains, the claw marks, they were bad enough. But this was something else entirely. This was a deliberate act, a conscious decision to secure a dangerous payload, a payload that was clearly so hazardous that it required extreme measures to contain it. The very air around the crate seemed to hum with a latent energy, a palpable sense of impending doom that sent shivers down their spines. Liam, despite the pallor of his face, reached out a trembling hand, his fingers hesitant to touch the cold metallic surface. He recoiled slightly at the coldness, his eyes darting nervously to the surrounding forest, half expecting some unseen horror to emerge from the shadows. The silence only broken by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a raven. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide with a silent question, a desperate search for reassurance in her gaze. Sarah's usual calm composure had crumbled under the weight of the discoveries, her face a mask of stark terror. She kept her eyes fixed on the crate, its ominous presence amplifying the already crushing weight of their fear. It wasn't just a skull and crossbones, It was the implication, the hidden threat of the metal container. What kind of cargo could warrant such extreme precautions? The thought alone sent a cold shiver down her spine, leaving her breathless and trembling. Mark, his jovial demeanor replaced by a rigid mask of fear, stared at the crate with a mixture of morbid fascination and intense dread. He'd always been the rational one, the voice of reason in their group, but even he was silenced by the sheer malevolence radiating from the mysterious container. The questions that swirled in his mind were relentless. What was inside? Why was it here? And perhaps most importantly, was it connected to the gruesome scene around them, to the creature that had left its horrifying mark on the plane? Emily and Chloe, usually inseparable, stood huddled together, their usual playful banter replaced by a shared silence, a silent acknowledgement of the overwhelming terror that enveloped them. Their youthful energy was utterly drained, replaced by the stark reality of their perilous situation. They clung to each other, their bodies shaking, their eyes wide with a fear that transcended the typical adolescent trepidation. This was a primal fear, a deep-seated instinct that screamed of danger, of something profoundly unnatural and terrifying. The five of them stood frozen, a tableau of paralyzing fear, caught between the horrors they had already witnessed and the unknown contents that once resided within that menacing crate. The silence, thick and heavy, was broken only by the soft sounds of their own ragged breaths. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of decay, metal, and something else, something primal and unsettling, something that spoke of darkness and death. Liam traced the outline of the skull and crossbones with his finger, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The image seemed to burn into his retinas, a haunting reminder of the danger it represented. The paint beneath his finger was flaking off, revealing a dull, metallic sheen underneath, as if the paint had been hastily applied to cover something more sinister. What was hidden beneath this grim warning? What horrors had been concealed, sealed away behind this rusted metal barrier? The crate size hinted at a substantial cargo, and the thick chains indicated that whatever was inside was not merely dangerous. It was impossibly heavy. This was no ordinary cargo. This was something powerful, something capable of causing catastrophic damage. The rust, the age, the decay, it all spoke of years spent enduring the elements, abandoned yet meticulously secured, hinting at a hidden significance, a carefully guarded secret that had been buried in this remote location, hidden amongst the bones of the victims, its presence seemingly threatening their own lives. They circled the crate cautiously, their eyes darting nervously into the darkening forest. The sun had almost completely set, plunging them into a twilight gloom that amplified the shadows and distorted the reality around them. The silence of the forest was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves, each sound amplified by their heightened senses, transformed into menacing foreboding. The air grew colder, a bone-chilling cold that seeped into their very being. This wasn't just the ordinary chill of the evening. It was something unnatural, something sinister that seemed to emanate from the crate itself. What if this crate was the reason for the crash? Were the mysterious scratches caused by what was once the contents of the crate? The weight of the unanswered questions, coupled with the chilling reality of their predicament, pressed upon them with crushing force. The mysterious crate, with its ominous warning and its unknown contents, was at the heart of it all, a chilling harbinger of the horror yet to unfold. The decision to camp hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the miasma of decay emanating from the wreckage. None of them wanted to do it, but they all knew the inky darkness was no time to be hiking through the unknown wilderness. Although hesitant, they all conceded to the fact that setting up camp here, in a somewhat open space, where they could keep watch on the dark edges of the forest, was preferable to being within the forest. Regardless, it was a no-win situation. The unspoken agreement to camp there, in the shadow of death, felt like a fatal pact, a surrender to the growing darkness. Liam, despite the tremor still running through his hands, began to unpack their gear. The act felt strangely futile, like putting up a flimsy tent against a hurricane. The ground was uneven, littered with debris and the scattered remnants of the plane's cargo, a grim tapestry woven from twisted metal and broken wood. The air was frigid, a chilling dampness that seeped into their bones, a stark contrast to the late summer evening. He glanced at Sarah, who was attempting to light a fire, her face pale and drawn, her movements jerky and uncertain. The flames flickered hesitantly, casting dancing shadows that contorted the already grotesque shapes of the wreckage into something more monstrous. Mark was attempting to assess their situation with a chilling detachment. He muttered about the lack of proper shelter and the potential dangers of the surrounding wilderness, a stark contrast to his usual cheerful banter. His voice sounded strained, thin, as if his composure was a fragile mask barely containing the fear that gnawed at him. Even he, the voice of reason, was struggling to maintain his grip on reality. His attempts at practicality felt like hollow words in the face of the overwhelming horror surrounding them. Emily and Chloe huddled together, sharing a single sleeping bag, their usual mirthful banter replaced by a shared silence punctuated by shuddering breaths. Their youthful energy had been completely drained, leaving them vulnerable and scared. They looked up at Liam and Sarah with eyes that spoke of a shared terror, a primal fear that transcended any ordinary apprehension. The skeletal remains of the victims seemed to stretch and twist in the flickering firelight, their silent screams echoing in the chilling silence of the forest. The air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive, a suffocating blanket of dread that pressed down on them, suffocating their very being. As darkness enveloped them, the temperature plummeted. It wasn't the gradual cooling of the evening. It was an unnatural, bone-chilling cold that seemed to emanate from the wreckage itself, from the ominous crate. Their initial morbid curiosity had been replaced by a gnawing dread. The decision to camp there, so close to the wreckage, felt like a reckless gamble with their lives. The warnings, both implicit and explicit, seemed to mock their arrogance. The skull and crossbones, the chilling words on the crate, the ghastly claw marks, the unnatural cold. It was all a symphony of impending doom. The fire, their feeble attempt at comfort and security, cast surreal shadows that danced across the surrounding forest, transforming the familiar trees into menacing figures. The shadows seemed to writhe and shift, taking on unworldly shapes, almost as if the forest itself was alive, aware of their presence, and waiting for the right moment to strike. The occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves sent jolts of fear through their bodies, turning even the most natural of sounds into terrifying omens. Despite their fear, they tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. They shared meager rations, their conversation stilted and strained, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences. Each attempted joke fell flat, replaced by a collective shudder of apprehension. The usual camaraderie was replaced by a shared silence, a collective understanding of their perilous situation. The laughter and playful banter that had filled their journey were buried under the weight of fear, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the night. Liam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He felt a constant prickling sensation on his skin, an unseen presence lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. His eyes darted nervously into the darkness, every shadow taking on an unsettling life of its own. He couldn't identify anything specific, but the feeling of being watched, of being prey, was overwhelming and inescapable. The hours crawled by, each moment an eternity. The fire slowly died down, the embers glowing faintly. The cold intensified, making their teeth chatter and their bodies tremble. The wind howled through the wreckage, a mournful lament that seemed to penetrate their very souls. It was a haunting sound, a symphony of death and decay. As the night wore on, the eerie silence of the forest was punctuated by a series of increasingly ominous sounds. The creaking of branches, the rustling of leaves, the snap of twigs, each sound magnified by their heightened senses, each sound a chilling prelude to the horror that was about to unfold. The air crackled with anticipation, with a palpable sense of impending doom. They were trapped in a nightmare, their decision to camp a reckless choice that was now sealing their fate. The forest was alive, and it was hungry. The night held its breath, waiting to unleash its fury upon them. The dawn seemed an eternity away. They were alone, surrounded by the remnants of death, the ominous crate, and the palpable presence of a creature that lurked in the darkness, waiting for its chance to strike. Their decision to camp was a turning point, not just in their journey, but in their lives. It was the decision that would lead to their terrifying descent into the heart of primal fear. The last embers of the fire died, leaving only a faint glow that barely pushed back the encroaching darkness. The cold intensified, biting through their thin layers of clothing, seeping into their bones, chilling them to the marrow. Liam felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the hairs on his arms standing on end. He wasn't sure if it was the cold or something far more sinister. He glanced at Sarah, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own. Emily and Chloe huddled together, their breaths shallow and rapid, their bodies trembling. Then it began. A low growl, guttural and primal, ripped through the stillness, a sound that vibrated in their chests, a sound that spoke of raw power and untamed savagery. It was a sound that chilled them to the core, a sound that promised violence and death. The growl was followed by the snapping of branches, the sounds growing closer, louder, more menacing. Fear, cold and clammy, gripped their hearts. They were no longer just afraid, they were terrified. A shape emerged from the darkness, a monstrous silhouette that slowly resolved itself into a creature of nightmare. It stood on two legs, but its posture was hunched and deformed, its movements jerky and unpredictable. Its height was imposing, easily 7 feet tall, perhaps taller. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, a dark, almost black, that seemed to absorb the little light that remained. The fur was uneven, ragged in places, hinting at a brutal existence. Its arms were disproportionately long, ending in hands tipped with claws that glinted in the faint moonlight, claws that could easily tear flesh from bone. But it was its face that truly held the power to haunt their nightmares. Its head was large and elongated, its features distorted and just plain wrong. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, two burning embers in the darkness, eyes that saw their fear, their vulnerability, and relished it. Its mouth was a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, teeth that dripped with saliva, a clear indication of its hunger. The creature was a symphony of vile features, a being of nightmare, a physical manifestation of their deepest, darkest fears. The creature let out another growl, a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality, a sound that announced its intention to hunt. Its eyes fixed on Emily and Chloe, who huddled together in a desperate attempt to disappear into the night. The creature lunged, its movement surprisingly swift and agile for its size, its massive arms slashing out with terrifying speed. Chloe screamed, a high-pitched shriek that was swallowed by the darkness. The creature's claws ripped through the flimsy fabric of their sleeping bag, tearing into Chloe's flesh with a sickening sound. Her scream was abruptly cut short, replaced by a gurgling sound, a horrifying testament to the creature's brutal efficiency. Emily scrambled away, her eyes wide with terror, her mind racing for a solution, an escape. But the creature was too fast, too strong, too relentless. It turned its attention to her, its glowing eyes burning into her soul. Liam and Sarah watched in helpless horror, paralyzed by fear, unable to react. They were trapped, witnessing the brutal slaughter of their friends, their screams echoing in the oppressive silence of the night. The sounds of the attack were horrific, the ripping of flesh, the crushing of bones, the gurgling of blood, all blended together into a symphony of terror that would forever haunt their memories. The creature's strength was overwhelming, its ferocity unmatched. It seemed to revel in the violence, its guttural growls accompanying each brutal strike. The creature's movements were precise, almost surgical in their efficiency. It didn't waste any time. Its attacks were swift, deadly, and merciless. In moments, Emily too was silenced, her body a mangled mess, a cruel parody of human form. The creature stood over her lifeless body, its eyes glowing with a sickening satisfaction. The attack had been swift and brutal, a display of raw power and unmatched ferocity. The creature stood tall, its silhouette outlined against the moonlit sky, a horrifying figure of death and destruction. The cruel beast then looked over at Mark, cowering frozen in his sleeping bag, too filled with blind terror to move. The foul creature reached down and grabbed him by his feet, wrapped in the bottom of his now urine-stained sleeping bag. Mark let out a short scream. The monster lifted him into the air as if he didn't weigh anything, spinning him over his head like some sort of squealing propeller. After a few impossibly fast revolutions, the beast let go of the sleeping bag, sending Mark thudding against a nearby tree. The sickly crunching noise filled the air. Mark, still encased in the sleeping bag, thudded to the ground, deathly still. The creature then turned its gaze towards Liam and Sarah, its glowing eyes burning into their souls, communicating its intent with chilling clarity. They were next. Their previous fear now transformed into pure, unadulterated terror. They were alone in the darkness, faced with a creature that had already shown its capacity for brutal violence and its utter disregard for human life. Survival was no longer a question. It was a desperate, impossible struggle. They were caught in a nightmare, a horrifying reality where survival was a matter of sheer luck, instinct, and desperate, last-ditch acts of courage. The creature took a step forward, its massive frame casting a long shadow that stretched into the darkness. The darkness itself seemed to have become sentient, its coldness seeping into their very bones. Liam, adrenaline surging through his veins, finally snapped out of his paralysis. The attack had been a horrifying spectacle, a brutal and efficient display of the creature's power, and the chilling preview of what awaited them. The fight for their lives was about to begin. The darkness held its breath, the only sound the beating of their own frantic hearts. The odds were stacked against them, but their will to survive, fueled by terror, burned bright. They both jumped up simultaneously, stumbling through the undergrowth while branches whipped at their faces and thorns tore at their clothes. Each step a desperate gamble against the encroaching darkness and the unseen terror that hunted them. The forest floor, a chaotic jumble of decaying leaves and gnarled roots, tripped them constantly. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional sliver of moonlight that pierced the dense canopy, revealing fleeting glimpses of the dark landscape around them. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the creature's presence, a palpable tension that hung heavy in the oppressive stillness. Liam risked a glance over his shoulder. He saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck that warned of imminent danger. He could practically feel the creature's gaze boring into his back, a silent promise of violence and death. He urged Sarah onward, his voice a breathless whisper lost in the cacophony of the forest. They ran blindly, their only guide the primal instinct to survive, their lungs burning, their legs screaming in protest. The creature's pursuit was a relentless shadow, never quite visible, yet always felt. They heard its heavy footfalls, muffled but unmistakable, crashing through the underbrush, each sound a brutal hammer blow to their already fragile hope. The sounds drew closer, relentless. The rhythmic thudding punctuated the silence, each beat a stark reminder of their vulnerability, a chilling measure of their imminent demise. Suddenly, a fleeting glimpse through the trees offered a horrifying sight, a dark, hulking form moving with unnatural speed, a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The image seared itself onto Liam's mind, a silhouette of immense proportions, a testament to the unrelenting horror that pursued them. The glimpse was enough to fuel their desperate flight, the terrifying image propelling them further into the unforgiving wilderness. Their escape was a chaotic dance of fear and desperation, a race against an unseen enemy that seemed to know their every move. They stumbled over fallen logs, their bodies bruised and bleeding, their clothes torn, their hope dwindling with each passing moment. The forest, once a place of peace and tranquility, had transformed into a nightmarish landscape of terror, a labyrinth designed to trap and destroy them. They plunged into a thicket of thorny bushes, tearing their clothes and skin in their desperate attempt to evade their pursuer. The sounds of the creature's pursuit became deafening, a chorus of snapping branches and crashing undergrowth that echoed through the trees, drawing nearer, closing in. The urgency of their situation intensified, each breath a struggle, each step a gamble. They stumbled into a narrow ravine, its rocky walls offering a momentary respite from their relentless pursuer. The creature's sounds faded slightly, replaced by the echoing silence of the ravine, a deceptive calm before the inevitable storm. Liam and Sarah huddled together, their bodies trembling, their breath coming in ragged gasps, their senses strained to detect the slightest hint of their pursuer's return. The silence, however, was even more terrifying than the creature's pursuit. It was a pregnant silence, heavy with anticipation, with the unspoken threat of violence and death hanging in the air. It was a silence that spoke of the creature's cunning, its patience, its inevitable return. Liam knew it wouldn't be long. They had bought themselves only a brief reprieve, a temporary respite in their desperate struggle for survival. The sense of being watched intensified, the feeling of unseen eyes boring into them, permeating their very being. They were trapped, not just by the ravine, but by the pervasive fear that had enveloped them, a fear so profound, so intense, that it was a physical entity, weighing them down, smothering them. A guttural growl, low and menacing, broke the silence, a sound that echoed through the ravine, reverberating in their chests. It was close, too close. The creature was upon them. Their momentary reprieve was over. The sounds of its approach intensified, a slow, deliberate approach that seemed to stretch out time itself, magnifying their terror. The sounds of snapping branches and crashing undergrowth, once terrifying in their urgency, were now even more terrifying in their measured approach. They were trapped, cornered, and at the mercy of their pursuer. The desperate escape continued, an unending cycle of flight and fear. Liam, his mind racing, scanned their surroundings, his eyes desperately seeking an escape, a solution, a way out of their deadly predicament. He spotted a narrow ledge, barely wide enough to accommodate one person at a time, leading up the ravine side. He had a sliver of hope, a chance at survival, but it was a desperate gamble, a reckless maneuver, fraught with peril. He helped Sarah to the ledge, his hands guiding her upward, their movements cautious, their bodies trembling with exertion and fear. The ascent was slow, agonizing, each handhold a potential death trap. The loose rocks threatened to send them tumbling back down into the waiting jaws of their pursuer. The silence of the ascent was broken only by their strained breathing and the occasional scraping of rock against rock. They climbed slowly, silently, their bodies a-reeling from pain and desperation. At last they reached the top, collapsing onto the earth, their bodies battered and exhausted, their lungs burning. The forest stretched before them, dark and menacing, but it offered at least the illusion of escape, a glimmer of hope. The creature would surely find them again. But for now, they had escaped its immediate grasp, and that was enough. However, the chase was far from over, their fight for survival far from won. The chilling sounds of the creature's pursuit faded behind them, a grim reminder of the horrors they had escaped, and the horrors that still awaited them. Their desperate escape had bought them a brief respite, but the darkness and their pursuer lurked just beyond the shadows. The fight for survival continued. The cabin loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the moonlit sky, its decaying timbers whispering secrets of forgotten lives. It offered a pathetic semblance of shelter, a fragile bulwark against the encroaching darkness and the unseen horror that still hunted them. The door, hanging on rusted hinges, swung inward with a groan, revealing a cavernous interior shrouded in shadow. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying wood, a suffocating blend of mustiness and mold. Liam pushed the door wider, his hand brushing against cobwebs that clung to the warped frame like ghostly shrouds. Dust danced in the weak beams of moonlight that filtered through the broken windows, illuminating a scene of desolate decay. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each creak a morbid echo in the oppressive silence, amplifying their already heightened sense of vulnerability. The cabin's interior was a testament to neglect and the ravages of time. Loose floorboards threatened to send them plummeting into the darkness below. Walls, once plastered, were now crumbling, exposing skeletal framework and gaps that offered glimpses into the inky blackness beyond. Furniture lay scattered, broken, and decayed, its skeletal remains shrouded in dust and cobwebs. A tattered armchair lay slumped in a corner, its stuffing spilling out like disembodied innards. A rusted stove stood sentinel in the middle of the room, its blackened interior a silent testament to forgotten fires. Sarah let out a shaky breath, her eyes darting nervously around the room, her gaze lingering on every shadow, every creak, every unexplained movement. The silence within the cabin was punctuated only by the rhythmic pounding of their hearts, a terrifying drumbeat that echoed the relentless pursuit that still felt so close. The isolation was palpable, a suffocating blanket that wrapped around them, amplifying their fear. The sense of being watched intensified, the feeling of unseen eyes piercing the darkness, their gaze heavy with silent menace. They moved cautiously through the debris-strewn room, their hands brushing against decaying objects, each touch sending a shiver down their spines. A broken mirror lay shattered on the floor, its fractured surface reflecting distorted images of their terrified faces, mocking their desperate plight. A chipped teacup lay overturned, its handle broken, its remnants scattered like the shattered pieces of their hope. Knowing that their ordeal wasn't over by any means, they began looking for anything that could be used as a weapon. It was meager pickings, but Liam found a rusty axe with a chipped blade. It was far better than nothing. Sarah checked some rotting cupboards and found a can of lantern fuel, at least half full. Coupled with her lighter that she always carried on camping trips, she knew that this too had potential. The faint light revealed a crudely constructed bed frame in a corner, its mattress long gone, leaving only a rusted metal frame, a grotesque mockery of comfort. The bed, or what was left of it, offered a meager respite from the cold, damp floor, a fragile sanctuary from the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the cabin's walls. Having exhausted their search for rudimentary weapons, they huddled together on the frame, their bodies trembling, their breaths ragged, their minds racing with 1,000 fearful thoughts. The darkness outside pressed against the walls, a tangible entity that threatened to consume them. Every creak of the cabin, every slight wind gust outside, every snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. They strained their ears, listening to the sounds of the forest, searching for any sign of their relentless pursuer. But again, the silence was worse than the sounds. It was a silence rife with anticipation, a silence that spoke of the creature's cunning, its patience, its inevitable return. Liam found himself gripping the rusty axe tighter, its cold steel a meager source of comfort in the face of overwhelming fear. Sarah clutched the fuel can, its metallic coolness, a stark contrast to the burning dread that consumed her. Their sanctuary was fragile, temporary, a deceptive calm before the inevitable storm. The dilapidated cabin, intended as a refuge, had become a prison of their own making, a claustrophobic cage amplifying their every fear. The darkness of the interior intensified their sense of isolation. The air was still, but the silence was far from peaceful. It crackled with an ominous energy, an anticipation of violence. Each creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Each shadow seemed to shift and writhe. Liam's imagination ran wild, transforming every crack and groan of the cabin into the movements of their pursuer. Sarah trembled, her hands clasped tightly together, her body stiff with tension. They were trapped, not only by the cabin's decaying walls, but by the paralyzing fear that had taken root in their souls. As the hours crawled by, the weight of their isolation pressed down upon them. The vulnerability of their refuge grew more pronounced with every passing moment. The silence was a living entity, feeding on their dwindling hope, twisting their fear into something tangible, something that could be felt in the chilling air, seen in the restless shadows. Every sound amplified their paranoia. They were two tiny specks against the vast backdrop of the unforgiving wilderness, isolated and vulnerable, exposed to the full force of their own terror and the impending return of the creature. Sleep was impossible, their minds racing with the horrific scenes of their recent ordeal, the chilling sounds of the hunt and the nightmarish form of their pursuer. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the far corner of the cabin, sending Liam and Sarah scrambling back, their hearts pounding in their chests. Liam grabbed the axe, its cold metal a material linked to hope, a weapon against the unseen horror. Sarah clutched the fuel can, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. The silence that followed was even more terrifying, with the unspoken threat of violence and death hanging heavy in the air. Their sanctuary had become a trap, their refuge a prison. The fight for survival they knew was far from over. The dawn they feared may never come. The false sense of security the dilapidated cabin offered crumbled faster than the rotting timbers that formed its walls. The silence, once a mere companion to their fear, morphed into a suffocating presence, a heavy weight pressing down on them, amplifying every creak and groan of the structure. It was as if the very wood itself was listening, waiting, anticipating the inevitable. The moon, a malevolent eye in the inky sky, transformed familiar shapes into monstrous figures lurking in the periphery of their vision. A low growl, guttural and chilling, snaked through the silence, a sound that vibrated in their very bones, a primal tremor that signaled the creature's proximity. It wasn't a roar, not the sound of a brute force attack, but a deliberate, calculating sound, a whisper that promised a slow, agonizing demise. Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with terror, her body rigid with a fear so intense it felt physical. Liam, his grip tightening on the rusty axe, felt the cold steel a poor substitute for the warmth of adrenaline that now coursed through his veins. The creature's presence was no longer a subtle suggestion, a phantom lurking in the shadows. It was palpable, thick in the air like a specter of dread, a predator closing in. They could feel its gaze, a burning weight on their backs, a feeling of being watched, scrutinized, dissected by an intelligence far more primal and brutal than their own. The silence pulsed with an almost imperceptible vibration, a subtle tremor that signaled the creature's approach. Each rustle of leaves outside, each nocturnal noise was no longer a random sound of the forest, but a deliberate communication, a perverse game of cat and mouse played in the shadow of death. Then, a crash. Not the gentle groaning of the cabin's failing structure, but a violent, destructive sound that shook the very foundations of their fragile refuge. A section of the rotting wall, weakened by age and decay, splintered and gave way, revealing a gaping hole that framed the creature's monstrous silhouette against the night sky. Its eyes, twin points of malevolent light fixed upon them. They were not human eyes, they were something more ancient, something far removed from the realm of reason and empathy. They were the eyes of a nightmare made real. The creature was larger than they remembered, its hulking form casting a hideous shadow that swallowed the interior of the cabin. Its fur, thick and matted with dirt and decay, seemed to absorb the moonlight, creating a chilling darkness within its own silhouette. Its claws, long and sharp, like obsidian daggers, extended from its thick, powerful hands. Its teeth, far too many and far too large, were visible in a chilling snarl, a repulsive grin that promised unimaginable pain. The creature was a tapestry of horrific features, an insane symphony of nightmare rendered in flesh and bone. This was not an animal, not a beast in the traditional sense, but something wrong and unnatural. Terror seized them. A primal scream caught in Sarah's throat as she instinctively recoiled. Liam, despite his adrenaline-fueled bravery, felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a visceral reaction to the creature's appalling visage. The adrenaline was replaced by a cold, paralyzing fear as he witnessed the true, horrific nature of their pursuer. The creature advanced, its movements surprisingly agile and fluid for its size. It moved with a predatory grace, a deadly efficiency that belied its lumbering appearance. Each step brought it closer, the pounding of its feet echoing through the decaying cabin, a morbid rhythm that mirrored the frantic beating of their hearts. The air itself seemed to crackle with anticipation, a palpable tension that threatened to tear them apart. Liam swung the rusty axe, a desperate, instinctive reaction, but the blow landed with a dull thud against the creature's thick hide, glancing off without causing any significant damage. The axe slipped in his grasp, the handle nearly breaking in his white-knuckled grip. The creature barely registered the blow, merely pausing for a moment before continuing its advance. The axe, their only weapon, seemed pathetically inadequate against such a powerful foe. Sarah, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored his own, fumbled with the fuel can. She tried to ignite it, but her hands trembled so violently that her efforts were in vain. She managed to pull the lighter, her hands shaking, and then the fluid-filled container seemed to mock her fear, slipping from her clammy grasp. It skidded across the floorboards and came to rest near the creature's feet. The creature continued to advance, its movements slow and deliberate, each step emphasizing its absolute dominance. Its eyes never left them, a malevolent gaze that seemed to strip away their remaining shred of hope. The sense of being trapped, of being hunted, was suffocating. They were cornered, their last refuge shattered, their hope dwindling with each passing second. The darkness of the cabin had become their tomb, and the creature, their executioner. The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a cage, its rotting walls closing in on them, amplifying their every fear. They were entirely at the creature's mercy. Liam tried again, this time focusing on a more vulnerable area, aiming for the creature's face. He swung the axe with all his remaining strength, a desperate, almost frantic attempt to defend himself and Sarah. The axe connected, but barely. The creature roared, a sound that was both horrifying and strangely pathetic, a sound that seemed to convey both rage and pain. It stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, buying them precious seconds to recover their composure. But this reprieve was only temporary. The creature's eyes, filled with a cold fury, fixed back upon them, and the hunt resumed. The creature moved with a renewed fervor, a sense of wounded pride fueling its advance. Their desperate struggle continued, a brutal ballet of survival played out in the decaying remains of the cabin. Every blow was desperate, every movement fueled by the fear of imminent death. The cabin itself seemed to be joining in their desperate struggle, its timbers groaning and creaking as if in sympathy for their plight. The creature was relentless, its attack swift and brutal, a demonstration of power that left Liam and Sarah battered and cut. Their only hope lay in escaping the cabin, but every attempt to reach the door was met with the creature's unstoppable resistance. Their chances of escaping with their lives were diminishing with every passing moment. The repugnant form of the creature loomed large in the narrow confines of the cabin, casting a suffocating shadow over their fading hope. The creature lunged, its massive claws tearing at the air where Liam had been a moment before. He rolled, narrowly avoiding the slashing attack, the scent of decay and damp earth heavy in the air. Sarah, scrambling back, bumped into a loose floorboard, sending it skittering across the rotting wood. The sound, amplified in the claustrophobic space, seemed to echo the frantic beat of her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. Liam, his breath ragged, scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the confined space of the cabin, searching for any means of escape, any possible advantage. His gaze fell upon the overturned fuel can, its metallic gleam a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. He lunged, snatching it up. He stumbled towards Sarah, his movements clumsy and desperate. He held the can aloft, his hope as fragile as the rusted metal in his hands. He fumbled with the lighter, his fingers shaking violently. It was a macabre dance with death, this desperate scramble for a weapon, for a sliver of a chance. The creature loomed over them, its eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. The lighter finally clicked, a tiny spark igniting in the darkness, a desperate beacon in their hopeless situation. The flame flared, licking at the opening of the fuel can, the scent of volatile liquid filling the air, a heady, dangerous perfume of impending destruction. Liam took a deep breath, his heart pounding a deafening rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat counting down to their final moments. He tossed the can towards the creature, his arm a trembling arc against the backdrop of encroaching horror. The can arced through the air, a tiny missile of defiance in a war against the impossible. It struck the creature's chest, splashing a generous amount of the flammable liquid across its matted fur. The creature roared, a sound of both fury and surprise, a monstrous shriek. Liam didn't hesitate. He struck the axe against the side of the can, showering a spray of burning liquid onto the creature's writhing form. The flames erupted, engulfing the creature in a blaze of hellish fire. The creature thrashed, a terrifying spectacle of burning fur and exposed muscle, its roars echoing through the cabin, a horrifying mix of pain and rage. The air crackled with heat, the flames licking at the cabin's decaying walls, threatening to consume their sanctuary entirely. The smell of burning flesh and hair filled their nostrils, a pungent, suffocating odor that clung to the back of their throats. The heat was intense, a searing wave that threatened to overwhelm them. Liam and Sarah recoiled, their eyes stinging, their lungs burning. The creature, consumed by the flames, was momentarily incapacitated, its movements clumsy and slowed by the burning inferno. Its roars lessened, morphing into pained whimpers, desperately attempting to extinguish the fire that consumed it. A wave of nausea washed over Liam, the smell of flesh overwhelmingly sickening. But the flames were not enough to kill the creature completely. They merely served to momentarily subdue it, to offer them an infinitesimal chance. The creature, weakened but not defeated, lurched forward, its burning fur leaving a trail of black and orange embers in its wake. Its claws, still sharp and menacing, swiped at Liam, ripping through his already tattered clothing. The pain was sharp, a searing shock that momentarily stole his breath. The axe fell from his bloody grasp. Sarah, seeing her chance, lunged forward, grabbing the rusty axe from the floor. She swung it with all her might, connecting with the creature's head. The axe bit deep, but not enough to kill. The creature roared again, a guttural sound of pain and fury, and lunged at her, its claws raking across her arm. The pain was blinding, a shock that sent her stumbling back, her grip on the axe faltering. Liam, struggling to his feet, grabbed a large piece of burning wood from the flames, ignoring the scorching heat that seared his hands. He swung it wildly, connecting with the creature's face, the burning wood searing its flesh, causing it to roar in agony. The creature recoiled, its movements becoming more erratic, more desperate. Liam and Sarah, battered and wounded but fueled by adrenaline and desperation, pressed their attack. They pounded the creature with the burning wood and the rusty axe, their blows falling with renewed purpose, their fear giving way to a primal rage. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, fueled by their will to survive, to escape the nightmare that had engulfed them. The cabin, already a ruin, was now a charred inferno. The flames danced and flickered, casting ominous shadows in the smoke-filled air. The heat was unbearable, and the smell of burning flesh and wood hung heavy in the air, a sickening testament to their epic struggle. Finally, with a hate-filled, Last desperate blow from Liam, the creature fell to the ground, its body still twitching, its roars reduced to low moans. Silence fell, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the crackling of the flames and their ragged breathing. Liam and Sarah stood over the creature's charred remains, their bodies trembling, their breaths coming in gasps, their faces streaked with dirt, blood, and soot. They had won, but at a terrible cost. The fight had been brutal, a gruesome contest of survival played out in the flickering light of the fire. The rusty axe and the burning wood had served as their crude instruments of salvation, weapons wielded in a desperate dance with death. They stood there, surrounded by the evidence of their ordeal, the burning remains of the cabin a chilling testament to the horror they had faced. The creature was dead, and somehow, against all odds, they survived. The cabin was ablaze. They needed to escape. Liam helped Sarah to her feet, his arm instinctively shielding her from the worst of the heat. They moved towards the back of the cabin, away from the raging fire, the heat and smoke stinging their eyes, and their lungs burning with each breath. They stumbled through the wreckage, past splintered wood and broken furniture, their bodies bruised and battered, their minds spinning from the horrors they had witnessed. They found a small, relatively undamaged section of the back wall. Liam, using the axe, quickly hacked away at the rotten wood, creating a small opening large enough to squeeze through. They crawled out, emerging into the relative cool of the night, their bodies aching, their minds reeling. They were alive, but forever changed. The forest, once a place of serene beauty, now seemed sinister, a place where shadows held untold terrors. They stumbled through the undergrowth, away from the burning cabin, their senses heightened. They looked back at the inferno, a beacon of fire in the darkness. Their memories of the night burned into their souls. They ran blindly, driven by instinct and the will to survive. The horror they had witnessed had stripped them bare, but it had also forged in them a resilience, a strength they never knew they possessed. They were survivors, but the scars they carried, both physical and emotional, would forever serve as a stark reminder of the night they battled a creature from nightmares. The dawn found them stumbling into a clearing, two broken figures, forever marked by their encounter with the creature from the wrecked plane and the burned-down cabin. Liam, despite his physical pain, found himself preoccupied with the puzzle of the plane crash, the wreckage strewn across the remote clearing, and of the crate itself. Was the creature some sort of government experiment, or something far more sinister and inexplicable? The thought of the creature's origins haunted him. A horrifying blend of human and animal features defied classification. It moved with an unnatural speed and agility, possessing a strength that seemed superhuman. Was it a mutation? A genetic anomaly? Or something else? Something beyond human understanding? Something ancient and terrifyingly alien? The mystery of the crate only deepened the enigma. The hazardous material sticker had suggested something dangerous, something potentially lethal. What secrets did it hold? What caused the plane to crash in the first place? Had the crash been connected to the creature, or was it merely a coincidence? Were there others like it? The questions piled up, each unanswered query adding another layer of unease, another unsettling piece to the insane puzzle. Liam decided all those questions could wait. For now, just being grateful that he and Sarah were alive was enough.